You're welcome.
Thanks, Samir. I'm going to go back and post on the HC compliments page that Samir has great technical skills as well. Thank you for that. My name is Marisa Randazzo. I serve as the Director of Threat Assessment for Georgetown University, and I also used to serve as the Chief Research Psychologist for the U.S. Secret Service. In that capacity, the U.S. Secret Service and the U.S. Department of Education conducted a study several years ago that's still considered to be the landmark federal study on school shootings in the United States. So I'm going to spend my time today sharing with you what it is that we learned from that study. And I'm joined here today by Bill Modulewski, who you already saw speak, who is one of our co-directors of the study and co-author of the study findings, and most importantly, of the federal school threat assessment model, which is what we know works to prevent school shootings. I'm going to share with you what we understood as we dissected school shootings, what we discovered about prevention, and now how we make prevention possible. There's a report, a picture I've got up here of what's the final report and findings of the Safe School Initiative, and you can find that on the secretservice.gov website, on our website at Sigma Threat Management Associates. I forgot to mention that Bill and I also work together at Sigma Threat Management, doing this work every day, working on to evaluate school threats, campus threats, workplace threats, handle threatening behavior directed against public officials, against high-profile individuals. So this is not only work that an area that we have studied, it is one that we practice in every day now. So you can find the report that I'm going to share the findings of online at secretservice.gov or sigmatma.com. A number of years ago, right after the Columbine High School shooting in 1999, when I was with the Secret Service, the Secretary of Education reached out to the Director of the Secret Service and asked, is there anything we can do to get a better understanding of school shootings? And the reason why that outreach was made was because the Secret Service had done some really groundbreaking research on studying attacks and assassinations against public officials and public figures and stalking of people who have a public profile or a public status. And it really helped to dramatically enhance the field of protection for these individuals. And so the Secretary of Education reached out to the Director of the Secret Service and said, is there a way that we can get a better understanding on school shootings with the goal of trying to do prevention better and school threat assessment better? So for the first time in history, the U.S. Secret Service and U.S. Department of Education partnered together to take an in-depth look at school shootings across the United States. And together we studied 37 incidents over about a 25-year period involving 41 attackers. And it was the universe of incidents of targeted violence in school. And what we mean by that was any school shooting where the school shooter chose school on purpose as the place where they wanted to do harm. So we didn't look at incidents where school happened to be the site of something that occurred just by happenstance. It wasn't just a crime of opportunity that happened to occur in school or something that occurred near school but was unrelated. And part of what we were looking at were school shootings where the school shooter wanted to do harm in school. And as one example, when we talked to one of the school shooters that we interviewed for this study and asked him, well, why the school? He said, well, that's where all my pain and suffering and problems were. Things were okay at home, but I had been bullied so extensively at school. I had asked for help from the principal, asked for help from my mom, asked for help from my teachers, and I was just told to ignore it. And it's really tough to ignore something and people who are making fun of you, hitting you, beating you up, tearing apart your binders and your notes day in and day out. So just as what we were talking about when we heard from Simone and heard from Samir, the real impact of bullying that can have. So just as an example, he said, I chose this school because that's where my problems were and I felt like I couldn't solve them any other way. So we were studying 37 incidents just like that, involving 41 attackers across the United States. And our main question that we were trying to answer was whether or not these were impulsive acts. Because we often hear in the media, we often hear discussions from talking heads of this person just snapped, came out of the blue. And if that is in fact the case, then there's really nothing we can do to prevent school shootings. So we used our data. We looked at extensively at the investigative records of these incidents. We looked at the criminal investigations, supplemental interviews, and in 10 cases we were able to interview school shooters directly themselves. And we pulled all this information together to really get a handle on, are these impulsive acts? And as you can see from the first point I have up here, they are rarely impulsive acts. School shootings are typically thought out in advance, and they are planned out in advance, and they follow a trajectory that we have called the pathway to violence. So in nearly all of these incidents, the attacker, the school shooter, and even workplace shooter, stalker, they come up with an idea to do harm, then they develop a plan for how they want to carry that out. Where am I going to find the people I want to hurt? How am I going to get the weapons into school? Then they actually have to acquire a means of lethality. They have to acquire weapons, or if they already have access to weapons, they have to figure out how to get those weapons to where they want to do harm. And then to the attack itself. So this pathway to violence that we have seen across these incidents starts with someone coming up with an idea to do harm, and then it gets more detailed and more entrenched. Idea, plan, acquisition of lethal means, and then implementation. In a nutshell, if you take away nothing else today, take away this. We can prevent school shootings when we can respond to some initial concern, someone's worrying us, they've engaged in threatening behavior, there's something on Facebook that's troubling. And we gather information to figure out, are they on that pathway? And how can we get them off that pathway? And it is quite feasible to get people off that pathway to violence once they're on. It is not an inevitable trajectory to harm by any stretch. So a couple of other things we learned. So first of all, these are not impulsive events. They're thought out and planned out in advance. Second, prior to most of these attacks that we studied, there were other people who knew the attack was going to occur. The key point is the other people who knew were peers. There were other students. They were friends. They were siblings. There were peers that this person may have met online but never met in person. There was a school shooting a couple of years ago that was stopped, a planned event that was stopped, that was averted, because a boy had befriended a girl several states away through mutual friends on MySpace, started telling her that he and his friends were planning a school shooting. She told her father because it worried her. He called the local police. They called the police in that state. And within about an hour and a half's time, there were search warrants out, and they had these kids separated away from school, talking to them, and found out, yes, they had an extensive plan, and were going to carry it out the next morning. So the term that the FBI has coined on this is a great one, and it's called leakage. The people who plan out these type of attacks, these students, typically tell other people what they're thinking about and planning to do. When we talked to some of the school shooters in prison, what they said to us was, I think I did that in a way because I wanted someone to stop me. I come up with this plan. In a way, I told other people, so now I had to go forward with it. I couldn't just back out of it on my own. I'd look like more of a loser. But in a way, I hope someone would stop me. Another key point that we saw was that even though these school shooters told other people in advance, very few of them actually threatened their targets directly. And the reason why this is an important distinction is there are still some local laws, there are still some school policies that focus just on the threatening language, I'm going to kill you. But we often don't see that direct language in a lot of these cases. What we do see, though, is some very concerning behavior. Another major finding that we see across this, and we looked hard for this, we looked to see whether there was any way we could characterize all of these school shooters in terms of demographics, any way we could create a profile of a school shooter. We have heard about profiles of school shooters, of terrorists, of workplace shooters, of stalkers. Our jobs would be so much easier if we could tell by looking at someone, I need to be more concerned about that person. I can be less concerned about that person because of their gender, their age, their racial demographics, their socioeconomic characteristics, anything. But the fact of the matter is we cannot. We looked, other researchers have looked, there is no accurate or useful profile of a school shooter. So we can't tell by outward appearance whether someone's more or less likely to engage in violence. But we can tell a lot by looking at their behavior. 93% of the attackers that we studied had seriously concerned more than one person in their life shortly before the attack for some very troubling behavior. Talking about engaging in violence, talking about self-harm, fixating on other school shootings, talking about now wanting to get access to a weapon. So when we report that behavior, there's a lot that we can do to take action and figure out, is this person on this pathway to violence? And as we mentioned before, most of these attackers had significant difficulties in their life. They were facing personal problems, whether it was because of bullying, maybe because of some undiagnosed mental health conditions, some strife at home, and they were feeling suicidal. And they were feeling at a point of desperation where they didn't see other options, other nonviolent ways to solve their problem. And they started to see violence as maybe the only way they had left, the best way they had left to solve the problem. Let me skip quickly to implications because I'm out of time. What we see from looking at this data is that we believe strongly that school shootings can be prevented. Many of them can be prevented because they're not impulsive. People think them out, they plan them out in advance, and they follow this pathway to violence. School threat assessment, that you'll hear much more from Eric Madfis after our break, is a process of fact-finding to figure out, is someone on this pathway to violence? And if so, what are the underlying problems they're facing that have gotten them on this pathway in the first place, that have gotten them to the point where they're thinking violence might be a solution or the best solution? When we solve students' problems, the underlying problems, they get off the pathway to violence and they stay off the pathway to violence. Okay? I think I'm out of time. I want to leave my information up here and am available for questions during, our question and answer period. I'm going to turn it over now to Dan Lowson from UCLA Civil Rights Project. And I also want to thank Dan Lowson for the cough drops that he gave me earlier. So thank you very much.